In this first of a two-part mini lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the political party. Now, in the last lecture, or the last series of lectures, we were taking a look at the media, and we went over this first. And that's actually kind of unusual. Once upon a time in political science classes, even potentially today, you would oftentimes talk about the political party before you would talk about the media environment. However, as we saw, and as I attempted to push forward as a claim, that the political environment today is actually, in fact, the media itself, those modes of communication. And so in this section, you'll notice we'll be talking about the declining importance of the political party, but I want to be careful that you don't make the other extreme move. The point here is not that political parties don't matter. Rather, that relative to other actors, political parties in today's contemporary America matter less than they once did. And where media was not always the central hyperized driving factor that it is, today it is in fact the center stage for almost all of the political communication that takes place. So I just don't want anybody to get done with these two lectures and think, oh, parties don't matter, media matter. Media does matter more than it used to. Parties still matter, but less than they used to, okay? And so in this, we're going to take a look at parties. Now, most Americans have a relatively negative view of the political party. As a matter of fact, if I could poll everybody who was listening to this, most of you, many of you, would say, I'm not sure. Those are kind of the crooked people who do things. And that is not a new concept. Political parties have not always been accepted in the United States. We have a long tradition of suspicion with political parties. And as we've already mentioned before, the Constitution itself doesn't mention parties. So much so that, well, think, the presidential voting. Guy with the first votes, as we talked about already, becomes the winner, becomes the president. Who becomes the vice president? The runner-up. So that's about as individualized as you can get. Nowhere in the American Constitution do we mention parties or anything even resembling parties, which is weird because lots of other democratic constitutions do in fact do this. Many countries around the world, in fact, vote explicitly for parties and not individuals. And so this idea that Americans are uncomfortable with parties, it is not new. It goes all the way back to the founding. And as a matter of fact, in his farewell address, here is what George Washington says. He says, "Let me warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party. This spirit exists under different shapes in all governments, but in those of the popular form it is truly their worst enemy." And you can't get much worse of a statement than this, right? I mean, you're saying the worst thing, right, is party. It's a bane. And this bane is the worst for popular governments. In fact, it's their own undoing. You can't get a much stronger conversation yet, as Washington is writing this. In his own administration, two camps are emerging. The first two political parties are coming out. And it's not as if Washington is neutral in this divide between Jefferson and Hamilton, the first big party divide. Washington's going to end up siding with Hamilton. As a matter of fact, his farewell address, you know where part of this comes from? Well, Hamilton will help him draft this. So we've always had this kind of Americanism of we don't like parties, we don't want parties, but we use and like parties. Okay, so with that bit of historical background, what is a political party? Well, a political party is going to be kind of like an interest group, and we'll talk about that more at a different time. But unlike interest groups, political parties are about controlling government, not just influencing government. It's oftentimes difficult for people to recognize this because they don't realize that parties don't just want to influence. What they want to do is to control. Parties are organizations that seek to control government by electing their own members to office. So in other words, parties want to control the governmental structure, and they want to do this by elections in democratic societies, but that's what we're going to be focusing on here, of course, because we're in the United States. So a party is someone it's a set of individuals, it's a team of individuals who want to elect their members such that they can push their team's agenda. So why do parties form? Why does the United States have parties when we clearly did not want parties? What would be pushing Washington to become partisan if what he's saying is that parties are a bane? Well, we're going to see that there's kind of three big problems that parties solve. The first is they solve a collective action problem. They solve a collective action problem. To get things done in government, we've seen this with Congress and everything else, this requires there to be a lot of cooperation. And so it is necessary to kind of team together with people to get this cooperation, right? You need people pulling together in order to get anything done, say, for instance, in Congress. Now, my guess is if we just put a bunch of people in the room and said, be Congress, even if everybody in that room hated the idea of a political party, relatively rapidly, you would begin to see teams emerge. And these teams would just simply be pragmatic groupings of people who have like-minded enough positions to want to help each other get things passed through a complex institutional structure. That's the collective action problem. And so this is exactly what happens. Parties are created to get things done. The second is a collective choice problem. A collective choice problem. The collective choice problem, well, it's kind of a heuristic. A heuristic is a shortcut for thinking about something. And in this case, right, imagine you want to run for office. Now, you could explain all the things that make you, specifically you, right? You like platforms 1 and position A, and you like, here Z, and you need to know all these things about me to decide that you want me. Or I can just say, yo, dude, I'm a Democrat. Or, hey, bud, I'm a Republican. And even if that doesn't completely and perfectly define me, it gives you a box. It gives you the ability to know something about me. It's a collective choice. It's a quick heuristic to understanding who I am, right? In the same way that you're going to make a bunch of assumptions about a device on the basis that I say, well, that's an iPhone versus an Android. Right? You don't need to know any of the details about the device in the person's hand to make all kind of heuristic cues, and that is a collective choice issue. The third one is the problem of ambition. Everybody who wins office is thinking, see, you've got me, it's time. The problem of ambition, though, is that you can seek for success, but also organize yourself at the same time. One of the big issues that will face people is how do you keep everybody from butting heads and running in the same direction? Well, the answer is, although it's not always perfectly successful, is that the team decides who's coming next. It will be this kind of informal structure that determines who will be the chair of the committee. And so ambition is checked with parties. So these are the three big problems that parties solve. And because of this, parties end up existing whether people particularly love them or not. Parties also kind of provide three functions or operations that we need to understand. We need to understand parties in government, and that's the first one we're going to take a look at. So what do parties do when they control seats, right? Parties as organizations, right? So we also need to kind of understand, let's fix that. We also need to understand how parties work in the context of what do they do, right? Just independently of whether they're in government or not, right? Libertarians, socialists don't have any seats in government, but it doesn't mean they don't exist as a party structure. And finally, parties in the electorate. What does it mean for me to be a Republican? right? What does it mean for anyone to be a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or anything else for that matter when we don't actually do anything for the party? What does it mean? What does party identification, for instance, mean? So we're going to talk about each of these in turn, and we're going to start by taking a look at parties in government. Now, as we've already talked about, one political party in the United States never and can never completely dominate the political system, because there's always a minority party in Congress that can push back and have relatively profound impacts, especially in the Senate, on what the party does and how it works. So in this case, what we need to kind of understand is that parties in government are not like other political parties. When a party wins a majority in the U.S., they don't automatically control all the aspects of government. Instead, they still have to share. And that's the issue of one party. So you do get some of this government by party, but it's always regulated by a minority party in the background. De facto, whoever is the U.S. president becomes the de facto head of the party, because they're also more or less the head of government, even if they can't get done everything they want to get done. And then behind them are the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate. And parties are going to control in this aspect. Now, the structure of political parties is a little bit different. There is not a singular Republican Party. Instead, it's a loosely organized group that is reflective of a federal structure. So that means we're going to see that there's a national party organization, but that there's going to be sub-pieces to it, because states will have their own, and so will counties, and so forth, and we'll talk about this. So we'll talk ultimately about the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and the Republican National Committee, the RNC, which are the most well-known. But state law and party rules will prescribe how the institutions will operate, and it can be very different from California to another. One of the big things that parties used to do is that they had big nomination processes to decide who would run for them, and that they would write the party's platform. They would contain the party philosophy and principles and positions on issues. But the organization really doesn't do this anymore, or at least not as big. We're going to see that primaries are the dominant ways, and so the parties as organizations aren't as big on this, but really they're more about raising money, they're about doling out the money, and they're about having kind of grassroots support, if you can call it that, as you move forward. And this is the outline of the way the party works. So there's a national committee, but then underneath this, every state has their own state party, and then county party, and city party. And this is, if you want to get plugged into politics, this is the place to start right here. Oftentimes, even at this level, you're not going to find very many people doing things. There will be also all kinds of subcommittees for the National Committee on the senatorial races, congressional races, the Governors Association, even all the way down to a legislative campaign committee. But again, this has not been as big of a deal as it once has been in the past. Instead, the big thing that you'll see is the organization structure of the party is the convention, where members come out and talk and kind of present themselves for the first time before the general public. Then finally, we want to talk about the political party in terms of the electorate itself, just a little bit. And what we mean by this is what we call party ID. Party ID is that enduring sense of psychological attachment that a person has to one or other of the parties. This idea that I am a Democrat or I am a Republican, and that I'm on some kind of spectrum, right? So if you ask most people, and they're going to say, yeah, I'm kind of a Republican. Well, what does it mean to be kind of a Republican? Do you go to the meetings? No. Are you in the newsletters? No. Do you give money? No. But I'm a Republican. It usually has something to do with the way that they vote. And what we see here is when we're talking about party ID, we're talking about the propensity of someone to vote in one direction or not. If somebody says they're a Republican, what that's a signal of is this is the way someone votes. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that we have learned in political science is that a party ID is a strong predictor, right? If somebody says, hey, I'm a Republican, we can almost guarantee that they're going to vote Republican pretty much down the line. And the same holds true for Democrats as well. Well, we went a little bit long, but we're going to pause here, and we're going to come back next time, and we're going to chat a little bit more about the political parties through history in the United States.